Hello and welcome. My name's Adam Sandman, and this is the webinar on SpiraPlan, and we'll be discussing Agile project management with SpiraPlan today. The webinar should last approximately 30 minutes, and there'll be time at the end for questions and answers. We are recording this session, so if anyone you know couldn't make today's session, we will be posting it on our YouTube channel and sharing the links to it. We'll also be sending a copy of the recording to everyone who's signed up on our meetup group or on our Eventbrite invitation. So today we're going to be talking about SpiraPlan and the project backlog and how we do agile planning. And we'll be using SpiraPlan, but this also applies equally well to SpiraTeam as well. The first thing we'll be doing is looking at a project we've created which will have a backlog, and we'll be adding some new user stories and requirements to that project. We'll be doing some basic prioritization and grooming of the backlog. We'll then start planning out the functionality, and we'll put some of those user stories into different releases, and then we'll focus on one release in particular and plan out one of the sprints. We will also discuss how you can work with tasks if you want to be able to break down a user story into smaller components. And then we'll also look at how you integrate defect tracking and defects into your sprints. And then the last thing we'll do is look at the program view, which gives you a higher level overview of multiple projects in SpiraPlan. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. This is SpiraPlan right here. And what we'll do is we've created this new project, and right now the dashboard is pretty empty. There's nothing much in the burn down charts. And if we go into the planning board for this project, what we'll see is we've got an initial backlog with 2 stories in it. And for today's demonstration, we're going to be talking about a fictitious reservation system for an airline. I picked this as something that most of us have experience of, at least as a consumer. But I'm not an airline expert, so anything I put up here is made up. Lastly, just to show you what we've done, we did create a new project. So ahead of time, I've created a new administration project. I went into the releases section, and I created one release with 3 sprints. And I made the 3 sprints back to back, so that each one starts when the previous one ends. And I also created a release for the second version of the system. I didn't yet create any sprints for this release. If I wanted to do that, I could go into the checkbox here, choose Insert Child Iteration, and that would create a sprint. So if I wanted to create a sprint for release 2, for example, I could type that right here, release 2, sprint 1, and then put in the version number, which I'll follow the same numbering convention I have already, and I'll put the date in as 9/4/2017, and we'll make it a 2-week sprint. So that would put us to the 15th, like that. Hit save. And so now we have a sprint in our second release. Having set that up ahead of time, I will now go back into my planning board, and this is where I'll spend the bulk of my time in SpiraPlan. By default, I have turned on the detail view. That lets me see the full story card. If you're on a smaller screen or you have lots of stories or requirements, you can choose the non-detail view, which reduces the amount of information, and it's handy when you have a lot of stories. I'm also showing defects in my plan. Right now we don't have any, but as we create them, they will appear as well. Similarly, we don't have tasks turned on right now, but I will be turning that on a little bit later on. So in the system, we have 3 main areas of the system. We've got an authentication section. We're going to have a website loyalty scheme, like a frequent flyer account, and a reservation system. So I created 2 stories up front. One is, as a new customer, I want to be able to register for an account while booking a flight. And as an existing customer, I want to be able to log in with a username and password during the booking. And those are both part of the authentication system. Another user story we could write would be about resetting your password if you forgot it, for example, which we'll do in a second. And as a brief refresher, what is a user story? It's a type of requirement used in Agile projects, which follows an approximate pattern. There's no hard and fast rule, but generally we have a KB article right here on it on our website in the ideas section. Feel free to check that out. It talks about what makes a good user story, and it should be understandable by the end user and customer. It should be in natural language. It should be a few sentences, and it should describe some of the information. Something like, as a customer, I want to be able to search for flights between 2 cities and choose the best route. So we'll go back to our planning board and we're going to create a new story right here, and we'll create it in the authentication section. And what we'll do is we'll put it in here as an existing customer, I want to be able to reset my password as long as I know my username. And that will be a story. Now in SpiraPlan, we do have the ability to put more information than just a simple sentence. We can put in the description field more information. So if we wanted to put some conditions, for example, we could make a condition that they are not locked out. That could be a good one. And maybe they remember their password reset question and answer. And it's up to you if you want to make your stories this detailed or keep them high level. One important thing in SpiraPlan is that you can estimate it, and we do it in story points. And right now we've given that one an estimate. The other two have given an estimate of 1.0. This is a little bit more complicated, so we'll make it 2 points. It's twice as complex as the others one we already have. We're not going to prioritize it yet. We're not going to assign it to anyone. We'll do that later on. So I hit add requirement, and that's now added in my board. And let's do something in one of the other sections of the system. Let's look at reservations, and we'll just say, as a customer, I want to be able to search for flights between 2 cities and get the options. And for example, in that we might have a condition constraint that they can use either the city name or airport code. We could decide that's a separate user story because maybe there's a search interface. That's up to you. And we might say they can specify how many connections, non-stop, direct, 1 connection, etc. And we could even maybe have more, give it more detail there. We could say non-stop, 1 connection, 2 connections, and then more than 2. That way you actually can define in more detail. And the more detail you give the story, when people start to build the functionality, it's more information for them. Obviously, in the system, you can have comments and people can provide feedback. So if something isn't clear, there is a mechanism to get that feedback. This is obviously a much more complex piece of functionality, so we'll make that 3 stories points. So that's one of our stories, is we have to be able to put the flight numbers in and get the actual options. Another story might be, as a customer who has a list of flight options, I want to be able to pick an option and get details. So for this one, we'll add information about this one would be that they can pick a departing and return flight. When they pick departing, they choose which return flight, for example. We'll make that 2.0 and that. Okay, that's pretty good. So we've now got 2 reservation stories. Maybe we want to add something in the loyalty scheme. So for example, before we do that, let's just do the checkout because we'll add that in. So the last one would be, as a customer who has picked a flight, I want to be able to make my booking with a credit card. We'll put in here some information. We capture the billing address and we capture the credit card info. We charge the card, and the issuing of tickets will be a separate story. So we'll take that one. That's a fairly complex one. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4. We can adjust later. And then let's just add one for loyalty, which would be as a customer during the booking process, I want to be able to enter an existing loyalty number. So So that's one story, and we'll do a second one, which would be, that's 1.0. We'll add a second one that, as a customer during checkout, I want to be able to create a new loyalty account number on the fly. So that way we have both situations covered. One is the case that they already are a frequent flyer member, and the other one is not. So we've got some user stories. So now that we have our stories, we now want to think a little bit about the plan. And so we can go into our backlog, and the first thing we might want to do is go in here and actually prioritize it. Once they're prioritized, what we can then do is decide, where are they? Well, here they are. Once they're prioritized, we can go in here and we can move them around so we can groom them. So for example, this one at the bottom, during checkout, loyalty number, existing, well, the new one is more important, so we'll move that ahead of that one. As a new customer, I want to be able to register for an account while booking a flight. Register for account, yep, that's good, that makes sense. So let's think about this. What we want to do is we want to actually think about which ones we want to do first. So let's take the new customer, we're going to register, log in. The reset's less important right now. We've got to be able to book a flight, and we need to be able to pick a flight. So let's put these ones into under review. Okay, and then we're going to come back to these ones later. So then we'll look at these ones and we'll decide right now we want to do these ones immediately. So we'll take these and we'll put those into accepted, like that. And this one, but it will leave it under review for right now. Now, in reality, we're going to probably do all of these in the first version, but you can basically look at all of the requirements coming in, and you have that way to see what's coming through. And before you start putting these into a release, you can quickly exclude the ones that aren't going to make sense. So there are things that clearly won't be in the first version. They may stay in requested. There may be things that, frankly, when you look at them, they don't make sense. For example, the frequent flyer, maybe you decided you're not going to do frequent flyer. Maybe it's going to be a third-party system you're going to use. So maybe you're rejecting those two. So you can decide how to manage them directly in this visual view. And you can, as I said, run them in different sections. You can still groom them. You can move them up and down in this list as well, just as we did on the previous screen. So now we've got all of our requirements. The next thing we want to do is be able to see when are we going to do them. So we go into the All Releases view and we choose by release. And you can see these at the top are all the items in the backlog, and these are our two versions. And this is when it's useful to sometimes turn off the detail view so you can see more of the screen. So what we're going to do now is decide, well, what's in release 1? Well, let's put this one here, register for an account, existing customer. Let's in fact put all of these in that first release, like that. That's great. And nothing yet is in release 2, so we'll come back to release 2. And now we go into release 1. We've got the sprints. So we've got 3 sprints, and so we'll mix this up a bit. We'll do the registration for an account and the login. We'll do that together in sprint 1. So we have a login section. We want to be able to reset the password. Well, that's a more exception case. It needs to be done in this version, but we don't want to do it to the end. So we'll put that over here. It's lower risk. And the searching of the flights, picking the flights, and doing the booking, it's a fair amount of work. We'll put that into sprint 2. And you'll see right here, you can see how much time is utilized. What we do is we take the story points and we actually can convert them into hours based on the team's historical velocity. And so you can actually get a rough idea of how long it's going to take. As you start to actually do work and you start to have tasks and time being spent, the system will adjust that conversion factor so you actually get a feedback loop. But you can see quite clearly this first sprint is much bigger than the others. So we probably want to pull one of the early ones. For example, picked a flight, searching of flights, the first one. Let's move that into the first sprint. So we now have a more even distribution. So now that we have our 3 sprints, what we can now do is click on the sprint itself, and we can actually then see by status where things are. And right now we have 3 requirements that are planned, and nothing is yet in progress. So that's the basic sprint planning. What we now want to think about, are we going to start to have tasks? So SpiraPlan lets you take each of these requirements or stories and actually break them down one level into tasks. And that depends on your methodology and the size of it. For example, if we look at this one as a new customer, I want to be able to register for an account while booking it. It's a fairly small piece of functionality. We might be able to just give that to a single person to work on. Similarly, the login with the username and password could be the same thing. And so if I just do a detail view, you can see the full description. Those are pretty straightforward. We could probably just give those to someone. Whereas this third one, the ability to search for flights, it's 3 story points. It's going to require several people working on it. We want to be able to have more discrete tracking. So that one we're going to use tasks. So if we're not going to use tasks, the simplest thing we can do is look by person. And we'll see, okay, who's in the project? Well, right now we just have me. So one of the things we'll need to do is go back into the administration section quickly and add some people to our project. We forgot to do that. So the way it works in SpiraPlan is you have your project, and this is our webinar project right here. And we go into the project membership, and we'll find there's only one user. So we go back in here, hit the add button, and let's add Fred as a manager, and we'll put in where's he gone? Joe Smith as a developer. I'll put him as a manager for now. So we have 2 more users, and that'll make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So now we go back into our planning board view, and we now have 3 people, which is a bit easier. So what I'll do is I'm going to assign Fred. He's going to do the registration, and it makes sense for him to do both. So we'll give Fred those 2, and we'll make Joe in charge of the overall flight functionality. But this is a bit bigger. So what we'll do is I'm going to close some of my browser tabs down, and I'm going to open up this up in a different tab. And let's add some tasks. So the way SpiraPlan works is you have the overall requirement or user story, and you have tasks. So if we go in here, we can add a couple of different tasks. So this is the ability to search for flights between the cities and get options. So one task might be create the flight search page. Okay, another task might be create the flight results page. So that's one is the place where you enter the flight search query, one is it gives you the results, and maybe a third task would be create the searching algorithm that matches flights. And what we can do is we could assign, perhaps Joe can have one of these, and we can assign maybe Fred to work on the flight page because he has some time available, like that. So that way you can divide up the work. And so when you have a larger requirement or user story, it's useful to be able to break it up into more detail, but you don't have to. And each of the tasks will then, if you click on it, can actually have its own information as well. So if we look at this one, the flight search page as an example, this is the actual task. And it has its own workflow engine, so you can decide when to start it, when to work on it. And what will happen is, as you can see here, we've assigned it to Joe, and we haven't prioritized it, but we could. And then we have an initial estimate, and Joe can go in here and actually give it a time estimate. So whereas you estimate the requirements and stories in points, you can actually estimate the tasks in hours. So that way it allows us to check the velocity. The other advantage is that when we start to put defects into the planning board, we can actually take a look at the time the defects are going to take, and that will adjust how much time is actually going to be available. So let's say we think this is going to take me 12 hours to do, so I can hit save on that. And I'm going to start on the 20th, and I'm actually going to be done before that. I should be done maybe by the 25th, like that. So that's saved, and that's now been assigned to Joe. If we go back into our planning board view, now that we have assigned that out and we've also assigned a task to it, we can now turn on the option to show tasks, and we'll actually see those three tasks underneath. And if you hover the mouse over, you can get information on the name of it, and you can see the progress bar, which has gone yellow because it's actually late starting. It should have started today because we assigned it today, and it's already running late. So that's how you set up the planning board. And then what will happen next is that Joe will then work on those tasks, and we'll actually see the progress. So let's go ahead and actually log in as Joe and see how Joe sees things. So if we log out, and we'll log in as Joe Smith. The password is please change if you're using the demo system. These logins are available in the system, so you can actually log in as that user. And he's going to go to his My page. and demo project, we'll change it to the project we're interested in. And if we go back to the My page, we can just show the current project, which is good. And there's my assigned requirement, there's my task. So let's go into the flight search page, and let's go in ahead here, and let's go ahead and complete the task. So we'll start it, and we're in progress, and let's pretend we did it already, and we'll add a comment back to the person saying, completed it. The system displays the correct information. So we're going to complete the task, and let's say we were supposed to take 12 hours, and we actually took 10 hours because we're really efficient, and there's nothing remaining because we're done. So there is a time tracking capability in the system too. Hit save, and now it's done. If I wanted to log time, I could actually do it using the time card view as well, and that would let me do it across multiple tasks. So I do have an option in the assigned task section to log hours directly actually in this time card view, which if I've got lots of tasks can be a nice time saver. So that's what Joe does. And if we go back, we'll log out and we'll log in as Fred, and Fred's going to log in, and Fred's going to work on the demo project also. So we'll just choose that project, and we'll filter on My page down to that one as well. So this is my page as Fred. This is what I would see when I come in. Here's my current project, and I have a task to create the flight results page. And Fred's going to do that, so we'll hit start. Oh, I need to enter the estimated effort. We didn't estimate this one, so we'll say it's estimated for 8 hours. And we're starting it, so we've spent 0 hours so far, and 8 hours are still remaining. And then we're going to finish it. We'll complete the task. We won't bother adding a comment this time. The estimated effort was 8. The actual effort will say we actually spent 9 hours and 0 hours remaining. And as you're in a project that's midway through, you'll actually be able to have them. And this is an important feature because people often get confused. The estimated effort, that's the time it was originally thought of this task would take. And we do have the same thing for instance as well. The actual effort is the amount of time I have spent. That doesn't mean I've necessarily completed everything yet. So I've spent 9 hours, but I could still have an hour remaining. So the remaining effort is actually how much time is left. And the remaining time that's left is actually used to calculate the percent complete. We found in testing that most people don't have a good way of estimating intuitively a percent complete. If you ask someone how much time is left, they actually have a very good estimate. I've got about 2 hours left. However, if you say what percentage you've done, they'll say, oh, I'm 90% done. And when you compare those two numbers, there actually may only be 70% done. So we actually take the remaining effort, which is how many hours are left, and we use that with the estimate to tell you how much the projected effort is actually going to be with the actual. And then the actual is how much time was spent. So you spent 9 hours, you've got 2 hours to go. Well, you're actually the projected effort is going to be 11 hours, for example. So we use these very carefully so you can have different metrics. In this case, we've marked it as done. So we'll finally log back out again, and we'll log back in as our original user who's in charge of the project. There's our planning board again, so I'll just refresh this. And we'll see now we've got some greens, which is very nice. These two tasks of green, they're 100% done. And this particular requirement is also marked as done, which is good. And the reason, so you may wonder, well, why is it saying all done when there's a third task? Well, when we look at percentage complete, we're actually using the estimate to figure out how much time is left. So this one doesn't have any hours on it yet. So to get a more accurate view, we should really estimate this one as well. So this is the one to create the algorithm that matches the flights. That's actually fairly complicated. It's going to take us about 20 hours to do. Isn't yet started. It's going to start maybe on Monday, and it's going to last from the 24th through to the end of the week. So we'll hit save. So that's now marked as grey, meaning not yet done. If we go back to our planning board view and just refresh it, we'll now get a more accurate view, which is that this third task is not done. These two are done. The overall progress bar shows that percentage complete as a green bar against the whole bar. Grey means the future work. Green is what's done to date. We're actually about 48% done. and that's very helpful. So we can see how far we are here. These two are very small stories. We're going to just track those directly at the story or requirement level. And so now if we go into the by status view, we'll notice that this particular requirement is still in progress, which is correct. And the system is automatically going to move it to developed once you've actually completed all the tasks. The system has an option in it so that when these tasks are all done, it will automatically move in the planning board. So if you're interested in that feature, you can go into administration and you can go into the planning board options under planning. And that's where a lot of the rules are set up in the system. And this is the default view. So by default, we have some default values of story points and default values of hours we use for our estimation. But one of the things that's also very important is these four options here. 3 are turned on by default. The auto planning means when I assign a requirement or story to a release or sprint, we automatically move it in the planning board to the planned status. And you'll have seen that. It actually moved to planned automatically. Do we want the task status to drive it so that when all the tasks are done, do we move it to developed automatically? And then lastly, this is for SpiraTeam customers, not for SpiraPlan customers. If you're using the SpiraTeam where you have test management integrated, when all the tests get passed, do we want the requirement automatically moved to tested? And so these are turned on by default, but some customers want to be able to do everything in the planning board themselves and not have SpiraTeam or Plan do it for them, so you have the option to turn it off. For these two requirements that don't have tasks, those do require me to manually move them over to developed, like that. And so we've now moved those over from the progress to the developed section. And then in real life, we would then test those, and then they'd eventually move to completed. And either I can move them to completed, or in many cases, in this case Fred and Joe, they would move them to completed directly on the requirements page. And they can do that by just going to the item from the My page, and they can change the status right here in the workflow. So they can move it as completed, for example. So that's how the requirements will move. Now, we've talked a lot about requirements. We've moved them through the life cycle. They've been on the planning board. This particular requirement is still in progress. Let's say we actually have an issue. As this case, I think it's Joe. As Joe's working on this particular story, he runs into an issue. And this issue is something we have to actually consider for the next sprint. So how does that look? If we look at the next sprint, so we go to sprint 2, we've got some things we're going to be doing. But let's imagine we found an issue. And sprint 1 is acceptable for us to have this issue. It's not so important that it has to be in sprint 1, but it's found in sprint 1, but it's going to be fixed in sprint 2. So what would happen is, let's say I'm going to log out again. I'll log in as one of my other users. So I'll log out. And I'm going to log back in as Fred. And Fred's going to log a new issue. So we're going to go to the quick launch and we're going to go create issue. And we're going to have an issue in the display of flights. So the display of flights is missing the airline logo. It's a bug. That's true. And it was found in release 1 sprint 1, and it's medium priority, and so we'll log that. So I found that the airline logos are not being displayed during the flight search. We can go live. In my opinion, he's not the manager, so he probably shouldn't decide, but he can at least say that, but needs to be fixed soon. So he logs that. He's just saying, I found it in sprint 1. That's all I know. It's not my decision as to where we're going to fix it, but it should be done soon, but it doesn't have to be done right now. So we'll log that, hit save. In real life, we'll put a screenshot in or something else, but we won't do that right now. So Fred's logged the bug. Okay, so we'll log out as Fred. Log back in as our admin user. And go back to our planning board view. And we are showing defects. So let's go back to our list of unassigned items. On the backlog. And if you go to by component, there's our defect right there. So let's have a look. Display of flights are missing the logo. Well, that sounds like it's in reservations. So we'll put that in reservations. And then we'll go to all releases. and we're going to group that by release. So there's our actual defect, and so we've decided we're going to think about this. Well, this needs to get fixed in release 1, so we'll put it in release 1 like that, and that goes in there together with the defects. And so the effort value associated with it will actually be accounted for in the same calculation as all the requirements. So we can continue and include all of the planned items, which are the requirements and the tasks that go with them, but also the defects, which are unplanned. So those also get included in that planning board calculation. Okay, so now we've got a defect, and if we go into the release, let's say we're going to put that in sprint 2, like that. And who are we going to assign it to? We can even do that part directly here as well. So we can do it by person, and we can drag that over and assign it to, say, to Fred. Well, actually, Fred found it. Let's give it to Joe. So we give it to Joe. So we can do all of that directly here in the planning board. If you want to actually then work on it, what will happen is I'll log out again. I'll log this time as Joe. And when I log in with Joe, on the My page, I'm going to see the defect. Just as I saw my requirements, my tasks, the defect is here also. It's assigned to me, and I'm going to review it. Maybe add a comment, investigating. So we know I'm working on it. Hit save. Adds the comment, changes the status, and now we go through the standard bug defect triage and resolution process. And once it's fixed, it then gets tested and included into that release and sprint. So the bug tracking is fully integrated within the planning board view. Now the last thing we want to talk about for today is the program level. So we've looked at the project level, we've gone down to the release and the iteration or sprint level, we've added some tasks, we've added some defects, we've seen how you can see them together. If I log back in as my administrator, what I can do is go in here, and one thing you'll notice is we did put this SpiraPlan webinar project, our airline project, under this internal projects, because this one project is part of a whole program of things we're doing right now. And so we want to make sure that we're planning the whole thing. So if we go into the program view, you can see all of the projects, you can see your requirements coverage, your progress, your tasks, your defect counts for each one. You'll see we have our one defect there for this webinar project. And if we go into the planning board view, we have a program planning board. And the program planning board lets you look across projects. So I can look at, for example, all projects. I can view it by project itself. So there's my project we did for a demo. There's our library project we're working on. There's our web. There's the project for the airlines. So you can see all of my requirements that I'm responsible for. And if you imagine this program is all connected, maybe each of these 3 projects is all interdependent, and I want to see the work that's going on. So I can see it segmented by project. I do have the ability to click on a project and actually drill down into the project and see what's being worked on, what's planned. I can see the flow, and that's very useful at the project level. And we added this in the latest version, but you can now do it at the program level. So I can look at my priority of items across. These are all my different requirements. These are the ones that are prioritized. So I could decide that maybe these 2 are actually high priority or critical, put those in there. And you can do this across all the different projects. So you're actually doing this across 3 or 4 different projects potentially. So you can now prioritize at a program level. The other thing you might want to do is look at the status. Where are things? So these are all the things that are planned across all my projects. And so I can decide, where's the bottleneck? Well, there's a whole bunch of things being developed here, and we're waiting on the testing, for example. Or maybe a lot of things are being reviewed and being developed, but yet haven't been developed. So what's the holdup? And in this case, clearly it's the testing is the backlog. So we would decide the bottleneck. So we could decide to add more testers in here to get these things through. And that lets you see it across the program. The other thing you might want to see is who's working on things. You can do it by person as well. So I can see that across all my projects, we've kind of overworked Fred and Joe somewhat. So we could decide that maybe we'll give some of the work to other people. And that gives you the program view. If you are interested in this recording, we will be doing more webinars in the future. Please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe for more webinars about SpiraTeam, SpiraPlan, Rapise, Chronodesk, and SpiraTest.